Hello and welcome to another Writerly Witterings. A late one. Apologies for that. Unfortunately, back in January, my father had a bad fall and broke his arm. And he's been incredibly lucky. He was 96 and a half years old. He'd survived the war. He'd survived employment, which wasn't easy for him. And he had 3 days off sick in total in his life, I think. But unfortunately, while he was recovering from his broken arm, he suffered from an infection which took him away. And that's had a bit of an impact, as you can imagine, on motivation to do videos and other things. But we're back. And I've been asked by Alice, hello Alice, if I could talk a little bit about my trajectory to becoming a professional writer. And how do I weave real characters from history into my stories? Well, the short answer to the real characters, it's a very difficult thing. I always used to have an argument with my friends in Medieval Murderers. Most of them, like Bernard Knight, would have absolutely no... Actually, Bernard Knight, Philip Gooden, and Ian Mawson had no compunction whatsoever about taking real characters and throwing them into their books with gay abandon, slandering them, maligning them in any way they wanted, because they had no real difficulty about people who have been dead for 600 odd years. I always found that actually that was a bit unkind, because I thought that if in 500-600 years' time somebody decided to take the name of Michael Jecks and use him as an investigator, I'd come back and haunt the devil. I don't think that just because you've died necessarily you should be allowed to take somebody else's name in vain. And to be fair, it's easy enough to invent a new name, so why use someone who exists? And then I started getting into about book 10 of my Templar series, and I had to make use of a bishop. And I thought, well, I can't really choose a different bishop, I've got to use the real chap. And then I started getting into the politics of the time, and I was talking about Despenser and King Edward II and all the others. I thought, well, actually, all I can do is try to get as true to their lives as I possibly can and see where it goes. But in terms of weaving them into my books, what I tend to do is use real characters more peripherally. So if I'm writing about Adam Murraymoth at Exeter Cathedral, then I'll use him as a bit of a sideline. I try not to get into his mind too much. In the same way with Bishop Stapleton, when I was writing about him, I tended not to get into his mind and talk about what he was thinking, except in a very bland manner. So my approach with using real characters tends to be along the lines of using my main invented characters to drive the story, but making use of Edward III, Edward II, Despenser, whoever it might be, more on the sidelines than trying to get them as being a major part of the plot. That's just my approach. It doesn't work for everyone. I know a lot of people are more than happy to write about the Tudors and others and make use of all of the characters, as I said earlier, with gay abandon, but it doesn't quite cut it for me. In terms of my trajectory to becoming a professional writer, that's easy, really, because I was a professional salesman for 13 years. I was selling computers for Wordplex Information Systems, Wang Laboratories. I worked for IBM's biggest software houses for AS400, so I was working for Bluebird Software, JBA, various other firms. But the only trouble was that the recession hit. Although I'd spent 10 years nearly working for two companies, Wordplex and Wang, in total in 13 years I'd had 13 jobs. The recession just killed off each firm one by one. So I started writing, mainly thanks to a very supportive wife and family, on about the 1st of January 1994, when I came to a conclusion that I wasn't going to have a career in computing anymore, because there seemed to be no way I could work myself out of the morass of dreadful CV summaries. And I thought, okay, so what can I do? I didn't want to sell Mars bars or Twixes or Snickers. I didn't want to go to a worse firm than the firms I'd already been working for, so I thought, I've got to try to do something on my own. And I knew I loved reading, so I thought, why don't I see if I can write a book? So I wrote one book, The Sniper, in January 1994. I wrote a second book, a management book on how to get yourself employed if you find yourself out of work, in February. And I wrote a third book, which became The Last Templar, in March 1994. The Sniper was snapped up by Bantam Press, very sensible of them, over the phone, and then rejected in writing 3 days later, because it was all about the IRA. And the IRA had just agreed their first ceasefire, so they stuffed that book for me, which is part of the reason why I've always rather liked medieval books, because the history there shouldn't change. That's what I thought when I wrote The Last Templar, anyway. More recently, of course, it's been discovered that Edward II almost certainly didn't die at Berkeley Castle. It's been discovered that he almost certainly wasn't gay. In fact, the number of recent discoveries since I started writing the series has been deeply alarming. I will rectify some of these things when I start writing book 33, which I will be starting immediately after Easter. And I'm looking forward to that enormously, because it's going to be great to get back to the two old characters, Baldwin Fernzill, Simon Puttock. And that really, I think, is about all I can say about my trajectory as a professional writer. I went from being a professional salesman to a professional writer as I lost my job. I was very lucky. I managed to persuade an agent to take me on reasonably quickly, and she was very, very effective and got me my first contract. I'd written the book in March. I had the contract signed and sealed in August of the same year. So we were very fortunate. And that book, Last Templar, came out in March of 1995, 1 year after I wrote it. Good stuff, I say. So, if you've got any questions, put the questions down there. Next video is up there. If you want to subscribe, go down there. And any comments or anything else, shove them down the bottom. And that's about it. Thank you very much. Take care. Cheers.